First of all, congratulations on this project. It is a fantastic watch. It's very emotional. It caught me so off guard. I thought this was just gonna be another explanation of what burlesque was, and it was so much more than that. Susan, why did you want to tell these stories, these very vulnerable stories that these performers had to share?
Well, that is an interesting question. Our previous film was about Mata Hari, who was the most infamous female spy of World War I. And in some ways, you could say she was an early burlesque performer. But when we were working on the film, a lot of our extras were from the world of burlesque. And one of the people who was helping us get the extras and find talent was a burlesque, worked with burlesque show producers. So as a trade, we started shooting burlesque shows, and I had no idea what burlesque was about. I really didn't. I had all the familiar misconceptions about burlesque, but once we started filming some of these shows and got to know the performers, I thought it was really fascinating, an absolutely amazing art form. And what really got me interested was once we started talking to the performers, I was really curious about what brought them to burlesque and why they decided to get up on stage and make themselves so completely vulnerable. And the stories that we started hearing were just amazing and inspiring. And that's really why we decided to make the film. It was really based on these stories.
And for Eileen and Plux Up Plenty, how liberating is it to allow yourself to be raw and vulnerable for this documentary and share your story so people understand that this art form isn't just about the performance, but there's a history behind it. There's personal attachment to it as well.
I think Pox and I are trying to be polite and not like talk over each other. Do you want to take that one, Pox?
Yeah, I mean, I discovered burlesque probably a good 7 years before I actually started to do it. I had just had a baby, and I was going through postpartum depression, and I found this documentary about burlesque on Netflix and watched it and got really inspired. But it still took me some time to decide to do it. Mostly because even in that film, I didn't see any bodies that looked like mine. I didn't see anyone that looked like me. When I started to go and see burlesque shows around the city, I still wasn't seeing anyone that looked like me. And so I thought, this is a beautiful place for me to go and see the shows and like have that escapism that way. But I'm not sure if it's actually for someone that looks like me. And it wasn't until about 8 years ago that I finally got like the courage to sign up for a workshop, did a couple workshops, and was encouraged to do a longer program to build a burlesque persona. And I thought, I'll just scratch this off my bucket list and, move on. Like, some people want to go, bungee jumping. I wanted to get on stage and do a little performance and move on. And I mean, here we are almost 8 years later, and I'm in this documentary. I produced my own documentary about burlesque. I produced 2 burlesque festivals, and that little baby that I was holding and feeling, just feeling like my whole world was so small and insignificant. My kid's 14 years old now, and he is deeply proud of me and what I do. And be the first person to tell you my mom is a burlesque performer and producer. So it's kind of a beautiful full circle moment. So much empowerment, things that I probably never would have done, like in my career outside of burlesque. Because of burlesque, I was like, no, I can do that. I can take that on. It's a really empowering art form, and it allowed me to have a voice and being in the body that I am, fat, black, disabled, queer, non-binary. My voice can feel really small in a lot of spaces, and burlesque gave me an opportunity to take up space and say what I needed to say.
Eileen, do you want to talk a little bit about your journey through burlesque?
Yeah, it's funny how much overlap I see in Puck's story and mine. I went, so I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2017. Went through a double mastectomy and chemo, and all of that. And as a way to celebrate, kind of like the finishing of all my treatment, my best friend was like, let's go to a Dita Von Teese show. Like, let's have something to look forward to at the end of this awfulness. And I was like, yeah, let's go. Again, like, I knew who Dita Von Teese was. I didn't really know about burlesque, though. And I was sitting in the audience with my newly reconstructed breasts, my peach fuzz hair, and I was just enthralled from the moment I saw a performer on stage. But during the entire thing, there was this voice in the back of my head being like, where are the bodies like mine? Like, I'm a leg amputee. I have no breasts. Like, what would these performers do if they found themselves disabled tomorrow? Would they continue to perform? Would they be empowered still to get up on that stage? And it was just something I couldn't shake. So then I started to search for disabled bodies in burlesque, and I couldn't really find any until finally someone was like, well, it needs to be you up there. Like, if you can't find it, then it needs to be your body up there. And so I sought out a local community burlesque group and was just going to do it that one time. You know, the first show was just a couple of days after the 1 year anniversary of losing my breast. So this was going to be like taking back my femininity, taking back my sexuality, owning all of my scars. And it was just supposed to be that one show, that one thing. And then I got on stage and started to perform, and it was life-changing. I went home just crying and being like, I found my place. Like, I feel so happy up on that stage. And it is another way for me to tell my story. I've been an amputee since I was 14. I've done lots of disability advocacy, and I just felt like nobody was really hearing me, as where when you're performing it on stage, it's a different way of saying those things, but it's a different way for people to digest it. And like recently last year I have a performance where I just take off my prosthetic and I throw it across the stage, and I've had so many disabled people come up to me and being like, I needed to see that. Like, it's one thing for people to say, yes, we include everybody, but that was a moment for a lot of people to be like, oh, you include, like, everybody has a burlesque body.
Definitely. And Susan, hearing the stories for right now, just it hits me. It impacts me. How did you get through filming this and hearing how vulnerable these women are, and yet still seeing how powerful their stories are? Are when they're telling it, how emotional they get. How did that process go while filming this documentary?
Well, it's true. It was very moving when we were doing the filming, but I had extensive conversations with every performer that we filmed. So I was prepared ahead of time. I did know their stories, and we had talked a lot about different aspects of what they had gone through. So we were able to, it wasn't a surprise, I guess is what I'm saying, but it was still very emotional. And yeah, I'm very grateful for both of them for being so open and so willing to share such intimate stories. And every performer in the film was the same. And that's not an easy thing to do.
It definitely isn't. And I think as the LGBTQ plus community is attracted to the burlesque scene, And I think it's just that self-acceptance, that self-love that I think everybody needs. It's not just if you're part of the LGBTQ community. I think we all need that instance where we accept ourselves for who we are. And I think this film highlights that very beautifully. I guess for all of you, what do you hope people are going to get when they watch this documentary?
Well, I hope we change people's perceptions and we do away with a lot of misconceptions about what kinds of bodies should be seen and celebrated. And I hope that the people who watch the film find it empowering and inspiring, and that they see the body positivity that's on display in the film. And I hope that connects with people and helps them in their own journeys to self-acceptance.
Yeah, I know. I hope this reaches people who feel like they shouldn't love their body. Like, we hear it all the time. I have stretch marks, I have scars, I have this, I have that. And we try to make ourselves smaller. So I'm hoping that the people who are kind of trapped in that small space can see that there is room for them, and that, you know, you should love who you are, you should embrace it. And that doesn't mean you have to get on stage, but hopefully seeing other people just loving who they are, and all of the messy imperfections, I hope that hits people, to just, that it's okay for them to love themselves who they are right now.
Do you want to add anything, Pucks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, to what we've been saying here, like, there is so much focus on the perfect body and what that looks like, and you know, there are so many different body types being represented in burlesque. It's really beautiful. But there is something really magical and really powerful about seeing bodies, especially bodies that are disabled, bodies that are, you know, Black and brown, marginalized bodies that are heavily controlled and politicized through, you know, racism and anti-whiteness, and you have, you know, the mistreatment of disabled folks. You have the mistreatment of fat folks, right? You see folks living unapologetically in their bodies, and holding that space. I really hope that people kind of are radicalized afterwards too. Like, one of the most radical things that we can do as people is love ourselves unapologetically, openly and loudly, right? No one can tell you nothing if you love yourself and you're, you know, feeling good about you. And so I think that's one of the most powerful things that we, as people, really struggle with, is that self-acceptance and that self-love. But it is a radical act to stand and take a space and say, I love who I am, you know, regardless of what anyone else thinks about me and how I move or how I talk or what have you. So I hope people are radicalized to love themselves and have more grace with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I think I've been exposed to some of the burlesque life here, community here in Los Angeles, and everybody comes to burlesque with a different story. It helps them in different ways, and I think that's very beautiful that we can all accept the differences that we each have and still be united through art, through dance, through whatever it is they take from burlesque. For each of you, what is it that that first attracted you to burlesque, and how do you continue to empower yourselves through it?
I think you should ask that Eileen and Puck that question first.
I had an answer and then I lost it because ADHD. just to have this platform to tell stories in a different way. I feel is just so important. Can you repeat like the end of that question again though?
How do you continue to use burlesque to empower yourself?
How do I use it to empower myself? For me, it makes me really push myself. Like when I got on that stage, it was all about reclaiming who I was as a woman, who I was as a breast cancer survivor. But that's not all there is to me. There are all these other intricate parts. I'm also an amputee. I'm also a mother. I am also a survivor of like childhood violence and domestic violence. And like to be able to share all of those stories is incredibly healing. And as that I get that healing, I feel more empowered by the person I am and the different lens that it gives me to look at that. All the time. I mean, people have asked, like, how do you just like get up there, like, and throw your leg across the stage and sew all this? And I'm like, well, when you have seen the face of death so many times, when you have seen the face of, like, when you are just faced with these actually life-threatening situations that change who you are as a fundamental person, to get on stage and claim that back, how is that not empowering? It is me taking ownership of my stories. It's me taking ownership of this body that, yeah, most people would have a really hard time living in. But it also makes me go, nobody has lived through the things I've been through, and therefore you don't get to judge the way I express myself and the way I tell my story and the way I heal. And it's just empowering as a mom. I want my children to know that they can do anything. Nobody knows their story but them. And so they get the ownership of their stories and how they tell it and how they present it. And you can't say, I don't know, can we swear here? Like, you can't say shit about that. One of my favorite quotes that I go to is, someone else's opinion of you is none of your business. And I truly live by that. People like, even the good opinions, I went, to a degree, yeah, because I don't also want my ego to get too big. Like, I want to stay humble and who I am. I appreciate all the good opinions, but I also need to remember that they also don't know my story. They only, yeah. I guess that's how I continue to feel empowered by burlesque.
Yeah. I've gone through some stuff the last couple of years with burlesque. I'm on more of the business end of it. I perform quite a bit, but I run 2 big burlesque festivals here in Seattle, and I travel a lot for burlesque, and I've been experiencing like intense burnout for the past 2 years. A lot of marginalized folks that do this work, who perform, also find themselves in positions of producing and like the business end of burlesque, and it's very draining. And so I've been asking myself this question of like, why am I still here? Why am I still doing this? At a certain point, you kind of feel like a masochist sometimes, where you're just like, wow, like the world's literally on fire, and I'm like worried about like crystal AB rhinestones, for a costume. Like, perspective is wild. I'm here because of community. I'm like, every time I think about like what would it look like to leave, this community nourishes me and I get to nourish it. So this is this reciprocal relationship that happens. Also, like, I like how political burlesque is. I really, really do. And so sometimes I think, oh, it might be time to hang up these, ballroom dancing shoes. I'm drawn back by how at the forefront burlesque performers seem to be about issues surrounding bodily autonomy and representation in the arts, and fighting against whorephobia and all these things that are like a cornerstone to who I was before I even touched a stage. So there's so much happening that like mirrors so much that I'm going through my life in this particular body, that like, how could I not want to be here? It's like the wild, wild west. We're not unionized. We don't have like an HR or anything like that. It really is probably some of the most entrepreneurial art magic I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, people literally pulling together what money they have to produce shows, to build their costumes, to pay someone to build their costumes. It's burlesque has especially neo burlesque has this really grassroots vibe to it, and I don't know, there's something about that still feels really powerful and potent, and really exciting. Like, I don't feel like we've seen everything that burlesque is capable of, and like I think that's why I'm driven to still stay here, is like I haven't seen everything yet.
Awesome. Well, congratulations to all of you for this film. The stories are very impactful, and it's a very emotional roller coaster ride watching this. So thank you very much for this film, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.